All right, here we are. Welcome back to Book Wave, another wave cast with Will and Pat. How you guys doing?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Good.
I've got a question for you guys, all right? Let's
All right,
jump right
shoot.
into it. Do you think access to clean, fresh water is a basic human right?
Hmm.
I'll let you ponder it for a second and I'll rabble a bit about why I'm asking this question. Because I was on Instagram and Nestle's at it again. They're pumping, I think, 11 million gallons of water out of somewhere in the States.
Yeah, I
And
heard about that.
they want to bottle it. They want to pump it out for free and sell it as bottled water. And so, of course, everybody's freaking out saying that it's a basic human right. They have no right to do this. How much money do they want to possibly make? Blah, 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 blah. And so that's why I'm asking you. Do you think it's a basic human right that we should have access to fresh, clean water?
I'm kind of torn on this issue.
Okay, let me give you a context, and maybe this will help Pat to chime in. Let's say, pretend, right, you're in the middle of the desert. You're on your own, and there's no village for miles and miles and miles, and you're a human, and you're in the desert. Do you have a basic human right to fresh, clean water?
I mean, like, the short answer is no, right?
Yeah.
But
don't give me buts. Now,
yeah, I guess if I have to answer it with one word, I would have to say no. Just because I don't think it's a human right, per se.
What do you think, Pat? Weigh in quickly.
I would have to say no as well.
Right. Okay. And so here's where a lot of people say, what the hell's wrong with you, you conservative freaks? Because they think that water is a basic human right. But here's my argument. I think it's a human privilege. And I think that in North America and in Canada especially, we're very privileged to have access to some of the largest reserves of fresh, pure, clean, beautiful water. But we pay for water. And if you don't know this, let me inform you. Water is one of your basic monthly bills. When you live in a domicile that receives water from the town, you pay for it. Every drop, you pay for it. You also pay to heat that water. Now, let's imagine you live in some destitute third world country where your closest watering hole is filled with disease. The notion that you could have fresh, clean water as a basic human right, just to be ironic, doesn't hold water in that situation. And so you'd say, okay, well, yeah, that's terrible. Everybody should have access to fresh, clean water. We that are privileged here in this land of the great free eagle should be providing fresh, clean water to the world. To which I'd say, how? There's 7 billion people and they need 8 cups of fresh, clean water a day, apparently. If they don't have any water for 3 days, they'll die. Big bummer. But how do you get water to everybody every day of existence such that they all have enough water? Well, you need pipelines, you need wells, you need filters, you need freight, you need transportation. And guess what? It costs a lot of money. So when you look at a company like Nestle, who is all over the world pumping out water and bottling it for sale to everybody, and you say, oh, that's terrible, that's conservative capitalism gone too far, they're just trying to make money. Well, let me tell you something. If you actually care about people who don't have access to fresh, clean drinking water and you think it's a basic human right, when was the last time you went to a store, bought a case of water, and then went to the post office and shipped it to those people? Because first of all, it's a hell of a lot easier to do it once it's bottled. If it's still just in a lake, you've got to invent a process for getting it out of the lake and transporting it very quickly and efficiently. Plastic bottled water, very helpful in drought situations, very helpful in situations where you don't have access to clean water right away. So a business bottling water kind of has to make money, because why else would you do it? Like, and here's the example I gave my wife. I was like, look, let's say we're in this utopian society where I am the only person who has a well with fresh, clean spring water. And you, my wife, are the only other person alive on the planet. I'll give you water every day of the week. Not a problem. All of a sudden, 1,000 people spring up and they will all want access to water, and I'm the only guy that has access to water. I would become their slave trying to give them 8 cups of water every day. There's no way that I'd want to do that when I don't need to help them.
Yeah, and
if
how are you going to keep supplying all that water if you don't get paid for it? You're eventually going to run out of resources. You won't be able to
exactly.
pump the water anymore without the money from these people.
So hypothesize with me. Imagine in this world where I have all of the fresh spring water in the world and the means to pump it. And by the way, if you've ever played with physics, just try pumping 1 liter of water 100 meters in any given direction except for down. It's
You need
hard.
you need like a pump from Mad Max.
Yeah. So perhaps what I could do, right, is say, hey, you 10 strong men, why don't you help me give water to these 1,000 people? And in exchange for that, I'll give you water without asking you for anything other than giving other people water. To which they'd say, well, why should we give them water? And I'd say, well, maybe they have something of value they can give us in return. And all of a sudden, you've invented capitalism. Water is a privilege.
My thoughts exactly. And another thing that I like to add is water is an element, just like fire and earth
And
and air. And those elements are part of nature. They don't give a shit about humans.
Thank you.
And
Thank
humans
you.
and humans can destroy those elements if they want to and deplete them. So yeah.
And now,
when we talk
One
about
other-
human rights, it has to be something that only exists among humans, like the freedom of speech and free expression.
exactly.
Yeah.
One other point that I want to make before it escapes my brain because it's fleeting. Oh dear, where's it going?
Come back.
Come back. Come back. Oh, right. So the
We got
destruction
some
of the
jokes for
planet.
you.
The destruction of the planet and climate change, right? So have you ever heard someone say that a CEO is evil and is destroying the planet?
Only every single day.
Right. So here's another fun thing. Have you heard of the notion of game study?
Game theory, you mean?
Yeah, game study, game theory, whatever.
Yeah.
So in game theory, there's this game called business. And the way to play the game of business is to create a product that gives value to the world. And if you're a company that is in the game of business, it's an infinite game and you're a finite player. And there's a few determined constructs to the game of business. So if you're a business or a company playing the game of business on planet Earth, one of those constructs is the planet needs to be alive for you to stay in business. Are you with me? Do you see where
Yes.
I'm going?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What business owner in their right mind with their billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of consultants, advisors, psychologists, and scientists hasn't processed the fact that if they destroy the planet, they'll stop being alive and stop making money?
Exactly.
Like, what businessman, perhaps he has the wrong premise about how he's dealing with the world and he may be contributing to climate change and destruction of the planet, but what businessman hasn't thought, perhaps I shouldn't destroy the planet?
And who's been more successful on the environmental front? You know, the corporations who have developed this carbon capture technology? Or
The
all
corporations that funnel millions of dollars into R&D because they have the benefit of millions of dollars from their business to develop things like water filters that are in straws so that you can drink out of a muddy water in Africa and not die?
Exactly. Or
Who is going to invent it?
Or is it the environmentalists that say, oh, we need to switch over to a technology that isn't actually going to sustain us? We can't go for nuclear. We have to do windmills and solar for everything, even though the batteries don't work.
Yeah. Like, we've come so far. And you could make the argument that perhaps, you know, capitalist society is flawed in that it all leads to business that destroys the planet, and we'd be better off as hunters and gatherers in a communal setting, existing with nature intrinsically as part of the food chain and perfectly balanced, and everything's great. But I want to capture a planet.
Yes.
Like, when you have 7 billion people that all want to eat food, you're going to destroy the planet. And so if you don't develop innovations to destroy the planet less through business and R&D and capitalism, you're screwed anyways. Eventually you eat all the food, or you produce enough people that you reach this critical point where you eat the last deer, you forage the last plot of land, it runs out of nutrients, and it's game over because there's 50 billion people on the planet and you're so darn warm, you mouth-breathing fools, that you create climate change just from farting.
Gotta get rid of all your cows.
And so that's why I'm pro-business.
Yeah.
Had to get it off my chest.
Can't wait to colonize Mars, man.
Right? Like, come on. How convenient would it be if we could just ship 5 billion people to 500 planets?
We
Hell
would
yeah.
expand and become larger.
We just slowly destroy thousands of planets instead of quickly destroying one. I think it's a perfect system.
I like the cut of your jib. Let's go ruin Mars.
Hell yeah.
I like how we talked about this one subject and yet not get into what books we're reading.
Well, sort of spurred from that subject, I read Atlas Shrugged, and I'm pretty pro-business afterwards, let me tell you. I might be in a honeymoon period, but oh man, capitalists, what lovely people.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about space. So I read the Night Flyer short story by George R.R. Martin. That was pretty cool.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
What's that about?
Poof poof.
Poof poof. Yeah. No, there's not much poof poof in this one. It's about this crew of there's 9 people and there's this one mystery figure named Royd Eris. And he's like a ship captain, and like the other 9 are the crew. And they're after this legend of the Volcran. This one guy has researched the Volcran through and through, different civilizations, and he's figured out that the pathing of this Volcran is coming his way, so he's gonna intercept it with his crew of 10 people. And it kind of turns into this 2001: A Space Odyssey situation, where you don't really know what Royd Eris is, and he's really secretive about everything on his ship, and a bunch of mysterious stuff starts happening. And there's a couple people that are psychics, and one's a level 1 psychic and one's a level 3 psychic. That's pretty cool.
Somebody has to open the pod bay doors.
Yeah.
Sounds very sci-fi.
Yeah, well, you know me. I love sci-fi.
Sci-fi Scott.
Yeah, and there's one little bit where they reference Jupiter, and I thought that was kind of a throwback to 2001: A Space Odyssey, because that's the goal they're going to in that movie. And one of the characters in this book is just I bet this Royd Eris guy is an alien from a gas giant like Jupiter. Y'all remember Jupiter? That's back in the old galaxy, back when we were only on Earth. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Classic.
I started reading a book called The Divine Comedy.
Oh yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so interesting book, written 800 years ago, maybe 725, somewhere in there.
By my boy Dante.
My boy Dante Alighieri. I think that's how it's pronounced. And it's his journey into the 9 rings of hell, and then through that he enters purgatory and then paradise. And it's very artistic. It's prose, and it's very convoluted. It's translated well enough, but it's just so referential to the time that it was written in that I lose a lot of understanding in it. But it's so fun to read because you discover that every single video game you've ever played took notes out of this book. Like harpies were invented in Dante's Inferno, and
comic
Cerberus.
books.
Yeah. Cerberus, the 3-headed dog.
Yeah, you ever read Spawn? That guy's straight inspired from Dante.
And so that's really cool. You guys should read it too.
Oh yeah, I think we're gonna make a video about it now that you mention it.
Oh right.
Yeah. You guys at home should stay tuned for that. Might see a video pop up on our channel called Dante's Inferno.
And if you act quick, you can click our affiliate link in the description down below and join in on the read.
And you will find the most beautiful hard copy, leather-bound version of Dante's Divine Comedy that you have ever seen.
Oh, it's so nice.
Great bang for your buck.
Absolutely.
And who doesn't like bangs and bucks?
So how about you, Pat? What have you been reading?
I was drawn into chapter 2 of John Truby's The Anatomy of Story, where he talks about premise and the difference between that and principle design. Now, we've all seen some of the classic, memorable movies like The Godfather, Big, Chinatown, Star Wars. And everybody who has seen those movies can pretty much tell what the story is about. But what John Truby writes about is not just because he not only argues why these stories last for a long time, but he also gives a blueprint of how they last for a long time. And that is through the design principle. And the design principle is essentially the meaning behind the movie, finding meaning behind it. Like, for example, in like The Godfather, the premise of that is the son gets revenge on the people who killed his father, the Don, the mafia Don, and becomes the Godfather. That's the premise. The designing principle is about a man who reinvents himself to become an ultimate character in a Shakespearean style of story. Or like in the book of Exodus, the premise of that book is an Egyptian prince discovers that he is Hebrew and he leads his people out of slavery. That's the premise. The designing principle of it is about a man who does not know who he struggles with in order to lead his people to freedom. And he receives new moral laws that will define him and his people. So those are the differences. And you can find many of those in other movies like the Harry Potter franchise or Citizen Kane, and he goes into greater detail about that. And he also goes through the 7 key steps of a story structure, which, if you've studied The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, it would be easy to describe. But again, in order for a story to have a meaning and for it to last for a long time, you need a blueprint. And so he gives out the 7 key steps of a story structure. A character starts off with a weakness, and he is trying to find what he wants. And through that, he has to go through a desire of obtaining this goal. Or what would happen if he didn't have this goal? Or what would happen if he did obtain it? Are there any kind of conflicts that would occur? And so on. How to prepare for the battle that's going to come up. And ultimately discover a new equilibrium.
I like
so
that.
that's what I've read so far. And I picked up a short story collection by Haruki Murakami called After the Quake. And well, we've pretty much, at the time of this recording, we finished talking about Crime and Punishment, and this one was also a bit of a downer, but it gives out some pretty interesting metaphors. And it's a collection of 6 stories, and these are stories about characters who go through disaster and tragedy, how they cope with it. And this was all inspired by the Kobe earthquake that occurred in 1995 in Japan. And just like all his other stories, Haruki Murakami brings this beautiful prose and description of the characters and the environments and what they go through. He has his same recurring themes, such as loneliness and isolation, love. And he also incorporates some bizarre supernatural elements that serve as metaphors. And so it was very interesting to read those. And I got into a little bit of The Undiscovered Self by Carl Jung. And I read the first part of his essay, on the plight of the individual in modern society and what it's like to find not just to find a balance in oneself, but also understand the reasoning why social groups are sheltered and become nothing more than just pawns of a population. They are controlled by their own ego, and they're not open to understanding why they are behaved in this certain way. And sometimes making rational arguments can work, sometimes it won't, but understanding the unconsciousness can do, and by bringing forth this sort of vitality of an individual, they can learn who they are, who they truly are, and become aware of the environment and other people around them, essentially.
Well, aren't you just a little Rita Rabbit?
It's been a while, but I'm catching up.
Yeah, you talked about two different things there, which is usually hard for me to process, but I will try. So you've got in your former a book about how to write books.
Yeah, how to write stories, novels, how to write screenplays.
That sounds very helpful for what it is that you're attempting to do. But I must say, I don't know if I'm going to be a writer, but maybe. It kind of interests me, but it just sounds like study.
Well, it's not exactly like encyclopedic. It's not exactly academic. It is a little bit, but I've also noticed that John Truby offers not just advice on how to write stories, but he also teaches you what you're capable of. You become enveloped in your own self and what you can do in a positive manner. And he gives out, like I said, he gives out examples from movies. He talks about characters and talks about how these stories last. Which is a concept that I've been very fascinated by ever since I was a kid.
And in the second one, is it an essay or is it a book? The Carl Jung that you're delving into.
It's a collection of essays.
Okay. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I need to get into some Jungian essays.
Yeah, I'm pretty fascinated in this John Truby book, honestly. I've been reading a couple books about like storytelling and just to get into creative writing and stuff. This one sounds really interesting.
This has definitely helped me go back and look at my manuscript and looking at the flaws that I've made and just realizing, okay, I can do better than this. I can fix this easily.
Yeah,
I can put in more
flaws.
ideas.
Gotta make those flaws sometimes.
Well, that's pretty cool to be able to look at something that you're writing and where you can improve and where you can expand and where you can become more concise. And it makes it sound like a much less daunting task. Like when I look at something like Atlas Shrugged, I think, my God, how do you write 1,000 pages with no margins in 8-point font and have it actually not suck?
The same with anything, right? You gotta start with nothing at some point.
I would say that if you want to create a story, you kind of like Atlas Shrugged, for example, you have to provide a balance between what you've learned in the real world and what can actually work in the story world. Because John Truby mentions that you should not confuse the story world with the real world. But you can find inspirations from the real world and incorporate that into the story world. And you can just go wild on those. Just let your mind flow and expand. And also provide the rules of how the story world works and make sure that they are, you have to make sure that they work. You can't just put one rule in and then all of a sudden change it maybe halfway or towards the climax or something. It could be like maybe like a Shyamalan surprise for sure, but it's
What a twist.
yeah. But you also have to keep in mind that of this entire world that you've created for the reader, once the audience delves in, you have to remember what they've picked up on until the very end. And I would also say that storytelling can also help you with your life too. I'm slowly discovering that and learning it.
You're writing the book of your life, PatMan.
We all are.
Yep.
We're all writing the book of your life, PatMan.
Yes, your life specifically. Will and I and everyone watching.
That's fake news.
Oh, jeez. What else did you guys have to say?
Not much.
Just had that one little rant about bottled water, and that was it, eh, Will?
I guess you could say I ran out of steam. When it's all boiled down, you know, if I could distill in one gushing...
All right, we need to stop this podcast before he goes any further.
If I could just leave you with one drop of essence that really resonates from the deepest underwater river of truth and prosperity, gushing out into a podcast like a spring, I'd say, don't kill people.
Read more books. Read what you love until you love to read. May the force be with you.
Or equal to mass times acceleration.